Well, welcome to our continuing journey of my response to your questions. And keep the questions coming, and more have come in. Uh, the beautiful thing about this is that we're dealing with things that I might not choose to deal with, but that's healthy because uh, communication has to do with dialogue, and that's what we're about. And we've dealt with this condition of the United Methodist denomination, and then we dealt with four crucial issues that we're facing today. But today we're taking a little bit of a shift and, quite frankly, dealing with a couple questions that I wouldn't have ever dealt with. Um, but that's because of you, and thank you for your participation. And so we're shifting to questions of faith today. And this week I'm combining a couple questions because they have to do with the same subject. And let me just quote uh, those questions to you. First of all, it has to do with the Christ event. Why did God choose the particular time and place 2,000 years ago for the Christ event? The other question is, do we not need the Christ event today as much as humanity needed it 2,000 years ago? Now, that's sort of a yearning for God to act now. It reminds me of the play of what, 40 or 50 years ago, the theme of the play was Waiting for Godot. Um, we seemingly in a waiting period, many of us, of waiting for God to act because things are not in very good shape according to the standard of agape love in our world today. But now my response has got to refer back to those of us who are part of the study of the gospel according to John, to remember what John continually was getting at, that the Christ event was not once um, and for all with Jesus 2,000 years ago. Rather, the Christ event was once and forever continuing through the lives of disciples. So I start with that backdrop of just reminding us, because 2,000 years ago, the faithful were up against the wall. They were persecuted, they were ignored by the masses. In such a time as that, despair was inevitable, optimism was foolish, external realities of pride and greed and envy and idolatry, they were in control. Then, from an unexpected place, not a palace of kings and queens, but in the little village of Bethlehem, emerged a man named Jesus, who became the one for others, who lit a fire that could not be extinguished. The revolution of agape love happened and continues today forever. Now, it's helpful to me to remember what happened 2,000 years ago, to remember what happened 80 years ago in the Holocaust. Um, for a period of time in my journey, I read every piece of extremity literature that I could get my hands on. And that was the literature that came out of persons who either died or survived the Holocaust and the prison camp experience. But I read story after story after story of the discovery of agape love, persons who lived for others in the prison camp as they faced their own extinction in the gas chamber. Certainly up against the wall of their own impending death. And I remember one story particularly of the person in the prison camp who spent their day massaging the feet of other persons in that camp, giving that other person a degree of comfort that they wouldn't have had without that person's simple, graceful massage. You see, for those persons in the prison camp, the Christ event was not a matter of history. It was a matter of them being consumed and engulfed by divine love, whatever their human predicament happened to be. The Christ event happened time and time again in the prison camps of life. A provocative question emerges in my mind. Does it take the Holocaust or some similar experience for persons to really discover agape love and be committed against all odds, even in the darkest of times? Does it take a Holocaust? Well, then I was in Angola 30 years ago. I marveled at the witness of faithful followers of Jesus whose lives had been lived up against the wall. They were living against all odds in the face of colonialism and greed and pride and envy and control and death. My friend Emilio spent years in prison for committing no crime, imprisoned because of who he was, not because of what he did. Now that's living up against the wall. I kept asking the question, how did you folks do it? How are you folks doing it? And one day in my visit, Bruce and Emilio, in the presence of others, addressed me and he said, Bruce, you need to know how much we care for you who are trying to be witnesses in the United States. He said, you have a much harder task than we do. He said, in Angola, we have lived up against the wall. We have seen vividly the difference between living a life of love and forgiveness and living a life of greed and destruction and death. Bruce, you live in a culture where faithfulness is to live the good life, which includes the abandonment of sacrificial love. Because the benefits of the abandonment of agape love far outweigh the benefits of the cost of discipleship. In Angola, we've experienced the joy, which is the benefit of living for others, for living for each other. You live in a culture which only knows the benefits of living for oneself. You've got a tougher job, Bruce, than we do. For you see, the people in Angola knew that the Christ event was not an historical event, but a present reality to be lived every hour of every day. To put it mildly, that was a life-changing moment in my life in terms of understanding the Christ event. Where Emilio said to me, Bruce, you are as responsible as I am to pass the Christ event on. But it's harder for you than it is for us. For we have seen and experienced what it means to be up against the wall every day. But both of us in Angola and in the United States have a responsibility to understand that the Christ event is not something back then only, but it's something back then and now every day. You can tell by the language I've used that I love the hymn, Pass It On. It only takes a spark to get a fire going, and soon all those around can warm up in its glowing in the Holocaust, in Angola, and in Winfield. That's how it is with God's love. Once you've experienced it, you spread His love to everyone. You want to pass it on. I wish for you, my friend, and this is where the memory of Emilio comes to my mind. I wish for you, my friend, this happiness that I found. You can depend on Him. It matters not where you're bound, even in a prison camp. I'll shout it from the mountaintop. I want my world to know the Lord of love has come to me, and I want to pass it on. So to answer the questions that you have raised, first of all, why did God choose the time and place 2,000 years ago for the Christ event to occur? My answer is somewhat naive, I'm sure, but also very simple. The Christ event cannot be confined to a time and place, to Bethlehem or Jerusalem or the Holy Land or the Holocaust or Angola or Winfield. As John's gospel proclaimed, God's love was from the beginning, revealed clearly to all in the life of Jesus, and the spark keeps glowing when those who find themselves up against the wall of destruction, greed, pride, envy, and death choose to live for others, not oneself. And my response to the second part of the question, do we not need the Christ event as much as people needed it 2,000 years ago? Yep, my response is yes. And the Christ event occurs when people of faith experience the joy of God's love in any predicament we find ourselves in and choose to pass it on. That is the Christ event today, vividly experienced and observed in others. And our life of faith is to pass it on. Now, for our thought and for our discussion together, conversation with each other, first of all, as persons of faith, do we accept the task of enabling the Christ event to be experienced today? Secondly, as persons of faith, what are the walls against which we live and are called to resist? Finally, what are our personal experiences of joy in keeping the spark of the Christ event glowing? And when have we observed this joy in others? Enjoy your thought, and we'll enjoy our conversation together. Thank you.